Welcome to determining if you have a dependent or not. So we're on screen 2, and I'm going to pull up Drake for a second here. So this was name and address screen. I had escape to get back. Now I have screen 2 dependents. I can click right on dependents. In this example, I have 2 dependents. You can see right there. So this is a returning client. So I already have 2 filled in there. It's highlighted in green, meaning I have some flagged fields in there I need to either check off or hit the F4 key. So I can click on this dependent, or I can hit 2 right down here in my search box and hit enter. That's going to bring me into the screen. Now because I have 2, it wants me to know which one would I like to go into. So I'm going to go into here, Bella, and now I have information keyed in here, but before I key anything in, I need to determine, do I even have a dependent to key in here? So if I don't have anyone that qualifies as a dependent, I don't even have to bother with this screen. So let's figure out what is a dependent. So let me go back, enlarge this, scroll down to the next page here toward the bottom. Who is a dependent? So the basic tests, 1, 2, and 3, those are pretty much straightforward. It's almost a given filing here in the X-Tax. It's the clients you're going to be dealing with. So taxpayer cannot be claimed as a dependent if someone else is able to claim them. Married person filing joint cannot be claimed as a dependent unless it's only retrieved withholding. So I'm not even going to cover 1, 2, and 3 because the type of returns you guys are going to be doing, it's pretty much a given. You won't be seeing any of these type of returns. So 1, 2, and 3 are going to be yes. So now we have qualifying child, qualifying relative. And what does that mean? So basically to be a dependent, and a dependent basically means that the taxpayer and the spouse are taking care of a child. That's the easiest way to rationalize, to visualize what I'm talking about. They're taking care of somebody, they're paying all their bills, so they should be able to put them on the tax return and get an extra deduction for that person. And if you want to know what a dependent's worth, I'm going to scroll all the way back here to the quick finder, as we did regarding filing status, and now we have these things called exemptions. And so you get to subtract, for each dependent you have, you'll get an extra $4,000 you can subtract from your income. So this is kind of like tax-free money. So again, because you're spending money on this person to support them, the government feels like I shouldn't have to tax money that you're just paying to support your children. So they actually give you $4,000 as a deduction to subtract from your income when you do a tax return. So it'll all make sense once we do a tax return. So this is what a dependent's worth. And it's not like you get $4,000 in your pocket. It's just subtract $4,000 from your income. It's a deduction, personal exemption. So there's also, dependents are also valuable because you get certain credits, which we're going to talk later in this chapter. So let me go back now. So I want to explain why you want to have a dependent. As we talked about in the filing status, head of household, you have to have a dependent. Qualifying widower, you have to have a dependent. So dependents are very important and they're very valuable come tax time. And of course, they're good if you have children also, but tax time, you actually get money for them. So qualifying, there's 2 definitions of a dependent, a qualifying child and a qualifying relative. It's better to meet the definitions of a qualifying child because you're able to get more money. Basically, your refund's going to be larger if you have a person that is a qualifying child, meets the definition of a qualifying child compared to a qualifying relative. Qualifying relative is good, but it's nowhere near a qualifying child. You're going to get a larger refund if you have a qualifying child. So here's the definition. There's basically kind of, there's 5 tests, but kind of like 4 tests, main ones. So relationship, they have to be related to you. So it can be either your child, your brother, your sister, stepsister. It can be niece, nephew, It cannot be cousin. It kind of stops at cousin. So that's the relationship rule. Age-wise, usually you're going to find you're going to be doing tax returns. It's going to be a child. It's going to be their child normally, and they're probably going to be under 10 or say they're 14, and there's no questions asked. Okay, it's when they get older, then you got to think, okay, are these people actually paying for their own support? Are they got a job? Are they working? Or are the parents still supporting them? So that's why when they start getting older, then the IRS starts feeling like, well, maybe they should be on their own and they shouldn't be being claimed as dependent on someone's tax return. So the rules are, if they're under age 19 at the end of the year and younger than the taxpayer, then they're okay. Because typically if they're 18, they're probably still in high school, and so most likely the parents are still supporting them. If they're over that, say they're 19, but they're under age 24, then they have to be a full-time student at the end of the year. So it's based on their age at the end of the year. They don't prorate anything, so it's as of December 31st. So if they're 22 years old, they're going to Michigan State full-time, then the parents can still claim them as long as that student's not supporting themselves. And we'll talk about that. That's number 5 here. Any age, if they're totally disabled or totally permanently disabled, so they're actually not able to probably go out and work and earn income, so their parents are going to be supporting them probably for the rest of their life, then there is no age on that. They could be 40 years old, and they're still going to meet the definition of the age test. Live with the taxpayer more than half the year. The residency test is they have to live with the taxpayer more than half of the year. Usually that's not a problem because they're children, and so where else are they going to live? Not provide more than half of their own support. So this would be this is actually number 4. Our support is number 4. So that means they're not out working and paying for their clothes, paying for their housing, and all that. Typically that's not going to be the case because they're children, they're not working, or they're maybe in school, they're over 19, but they're only earning money just to maybe buy a few things for themselves, but the main support's still coming from the parents. So these are the 4 tests. The last one, not be claimed qualifying child of another taxpayer. So as long as no one else is claiming them, which if they are claiming them, we're not putting them on the tax return normally. Okay, so it's usually relationship, age, residency, and support. If they meet those tests, they're labeled a qualifying child, and as when we talk about earned income credit and child tax credit, you'll find out that that's where the real money is. Okay, this over here, the next definition of a dependent is qualifying relative. So the tests are a little bit different. So number 1 here, not be the taxpayer or anyone else's qualifying child. That's usually not what's usually about number 1. It's normally we got here residency. So in this case, they have to live with the taxpayer all year as a member of their household, or be related to the taxpayer, closer than a cousin. So the relationship is the same thing over here. So for number 2, they could either live in the household the whole year, so that could be like a boyfriend, girlfriend, so they're not related, but they're actually in the household the entire year. So they wouldn't meet a relationship test, but they'd meet the residency test. Or if they're if they're related to them, say they're their child, but maybe they're their 35-year-old child, and they actually don't even have to be living in the household, then they would meet the relationship test. Okay, so there's 2 different things: either be in the household the whole year, not be related, or be related to them. And the third one is their income has to be less than $4,050. And that $4,050 is actually the personal exemption for 2016. So I just went to the quick finder at the beginning of this video. I showed you the personal exemption of $4,000. That was for 2015. So that's where this magic number comes from right here. So this is called the gross income test. So, and lastly, it provided more than half of the person's total support for the year. So the tests are, they either have to live with them the entire year, or be related to them, and their income has to be less than $4,050, and the taxpayer or the taxpayer and spouse have to provide more than half of their support. So this is a little different than here. Over on this side, it says the child, the dependent, is not supporting themselves. On this side, on qualifying relative, it's saying that the taxpayer and spouse are actually paying more than half of their support. So it's a little different. So typically, qualifying relative, it's usually going to find the boyfriend-girlfriend scenario, that there's no relationship, however, they're still living with them, and they're not working, and that's usually where they'll file as a dependent. They get a personal exemption, but they're not entitled to certain credits. So qualifying child is typically, it's usually going to be your child. It could be a niece or nephew, but they're around the same age. So I'm going to pull up what we call our client information sheet. So because you're probably saying, how am I going to remember all this stuff? Well, it's not that hard when the clients give you all the answers in front of you. So this is a sheet that we hand our clients, and they fill it out for us, and they come back and get your taxes done. So client information up here, this is where you're going to put in screen one, all their contact information, their address, their phone numbers, whether they're single or married, and then you determine their filing status. Then when we come down here in the dependent information, so they're going to give you this information. So if you recall, qualifying child, what was the test for? Relationship. They're telling me right here if they're related. So I got a son, I got a niece, I got a son, and I got a boyfriend. So these three, son, niece, and son, they meet the relationship test for qualifying child. Boyfriend, right away, there's no way they can be a qualifying child. At the most, they can be a qualifying relative, but we got to see if the rest of the tests are met. Number of months in home. So qualifying child, you have to be in the home more than 6 months. These three meet that test. The boyfriend, we know they're not a qualifying child. They got to be a qualifying relative if they meet the test. They have to be in the household the whole year because they're not related. Next test is age test. So here's the test right here. So these three, they're going to qualify. Well, this last one here, the one in 96, they're actually over 18, but they have the box check student. So now I got my 3 tests met for qualifying child, and if you recall the 4th test, we pull this away. 4th one was just supporting. So the only thing, this client information sheet is going to give you 3 out of the 4 answers for qualifying child. I got relationship, I got months in home, and I got age. All I have to ask them, are they supporting themselves? And typically, if they're kids, young kids, I usually don't even ask that question because it's just, normally if they're supporting, they can be a W-2, and I might do their tax return. Now if it comes back and it says $20,000, then I'm going to start asking questions like, okay, are you guys really paying their support, or are they supporting themselves? But typically, you're not going to have that situation. So now this last one, the boyfriend, determine if they're qualifying relative, if you recall. For that test, okay, we have residency. He was in the household all year. Don't have to worry about relationship because it's one of the two. Gross income, I need to ask, did Billy Jacobs here, did Billy have any income over $4,050? If they say no, my next question is going to be, did you pay more than half of Billy's support? If they say yes, they're a qualifying relative, and I'm going to go ahead and record all that information in the tax return. So your first step is to look at the client information sheet. You analyze it. You know the tests that have to be made. You've already got, for qualifying children, you got 3 out of the 4 right here. If they're young kids, don't even bother asking them, are these kids supporting themselves, because that's not going to be the case. If they're older, then ask the question, especially if they hand you a W-2 that's got decent income on it. For qualifying relative here, this one you've got, I guess you only have like 1 question answered, so you need to ask about the gross income because we don't have that on there, and you need to ask if they're supporting, if you're paying more than half of their support for the boyfriend. Once they say yes, or whatever the answer is, if they say no, then you're going to just cross this off because they're not considered a dependent. And then so the next step is you're going to fill this information into Drake on screen 2. But this is how you're going to determine if you actually have a dependent to put it on Drake on screen 2 or not. Thank you.